Good morning. I'm Barbara Johnson, and I have the privilege of serving as the chair of the Board of Governors for the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. And we welcome you to one of our continuing series, part of our continuing series called Voices at the Table. I am thrilled today to introduce our speaker, Congressman Bobby Scott, and particularly thrilled because he represents the 3rd Congressional District, which is the area where I was born and raised in Tidewater, Virginia. He has been in the U.S. House of Representatives since 1993. Congressman Scott currently serves as the chairman of the Committee on Education and Labor. In this capacity, he is advancing an agenda that improves equity in education, frees students from the burdens of crippling debt, protects and expands access to affordable health care, and ensures workers have a safe workplace where they can earn a living wage free from discrimination, and guarantees seniors have a secure and dignified retirement. In 2015, he was one of the 4 primary authors of the Every Student Succeeds Act, which reauthorized the Elementary and Secondary Education Act for the first time in 13 years and replaced the No Child Left Behind Act. So we are thrilled today to have Congressman Scott join us. Jessica?
Thank you so much, Barbara. And thanks again to the Joint Center Board and our supporters, and to the Joint Center President, Spencer Overton, for leading us in this work. As Spencer mentioned, my name is Jessica Fulton, and I am the Vice President at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. This session is part of a series that we're doing on COVID-19 in Black communities, and we will be posting the recording of this video conference on our COVID-19 page, so you can check that out on our website at jointcenter.org. So I want to start quickly with a bit of housekeeping. First, please keep your phone on mute or your microphone on mute. If you're on the phone, you can mute by pressing *6. There will be an opportunity to make comments or questions at the end, but if you have something that you really want to get out, go ahead and type it in the chat box for Chairman Scott and our respondents to see. So we are incredibly excited to have Chairman Scott with us to discuss some key challenges that we think have been clear for a while for Black communities and that we know that COVID-19 is making worse. First, we know from both economic and health data that's been released that COVID-19 and the current economic crisis are disproportionately affecting people of color, and that they're specifically affecting African Americans. Chairman Scott, can you talk a bit about the ways that the stimulus bills that have already passed might be able to mitigate some of these disproportionate effects?
Thank you. As you know, we've had a lot of discussion about the health disparities and how African Americans are dying at a rate way over a portion of the population, and people immediately point out that the disparities were there to begin with. So when you have COVID-19, it exacerbates existing disparities. They're economic disparities. And so when you look at economic disparities that are already there, when we have situations like COVID-19 coming in, the disparities are going to be exacerbated. And those are the kinds of things that we've been trying to address with the legislation. And actually, we've done, I think, a lot better at addressing some of those disparities than I would have hoped to. One of the first things we did, we put money into several of the packages: small businesses, airlines, healthcare, food banks, to generally address people who were in 8 industries that were significantly disadvantaged. One of the packages we had, they addressed the fact that many school children get much of their nutrition from school meals. They were closing the schools. We made it possible for them to get their school meals, notwithstanding the fact that the schools were closed. Now, the school systems didn't have to reinvent the wheel. We essentially told them, you remember what you did last summer when the schools were closed? well, do that. And so we gave them waivers and extra money to make sure that they could deliver the meals and that the students could get paid. We had extra money in there for education, half $31 billion, half for K through 12, half for higher education. Excuse me. Half through higher education and half through elementary and secondary. And we made sure that those disparities were addressed. There's not enough money in there, but we did take small steps. The education disparities, I think we're going to talk about in a minute. Higher education, we addressed the fact that colleges were trying to maintain campuses without students there. We had family and medical leave. Unfortunately, by the time the compromises took place, there wasn't much family left in the family and medical leave, but there was sick leave, 2 weeks that was available for anyone who got sick or had to quarantine for 2 weeks. They could get full salary for 2 weeks. But the major thing we did was restored the paychecks. All the problems that occur because of disparities occur because people lose their paychecks. You can't go to work, you lose your paycheck, you can't pay rent, you can't buy food, you can't pay your bills. To the extent that we can maintain paychecks, we solve a lot of problems. The first thing we did was subsidies, $1,200 for adults, $500 for every dependent child. Those checks, a lot of them have gone out already. Many are going out now. It's important that we notice that a lot of families, family of four, will get over $3,000. That will go a long way in getting through. I think the real key issue was the unemployment compensation, because we had, for those who lose their jobs and getting unemployment compensation, we just added a flat $600. That will go a long way in restoring the income for the median family. A lot of families, in fact, will get more. We've heard some complaints from businesses that they can't get people to come back to work because they're making more on unemployment than they were working. Well, the problem with that isn't the bill that we passed. The problem is they weren't paying enough. The minimum wage isn't high enough, and we're dealing with that separately. But the fact that they can get $600 extra a week, which at a 40-hour week is $15 an hour, in addition to what unemployment compensation, usually very inadequate, in addition to what unemployment was paying, would mean that most people, once you can get through the system, will have their income pretty much restored. That would eliminate a lot of the problems. Unfortunately, there's so many people unemployed in this pandemic that the employment commissions really had no business being able to accommodate this kind of load. The previous record for unemployment compensation claims in 1 week was in the 08-09 recession, when about 600 and some thousand people made claims in 1 week. 600 and some thousand. The record. Usually it's around 100, 200,000. 600,000 in 1 week. We had 1 week, 3 million. Next week, 6 million. If your computer system, next week, 6 million. Next week, 5 million. If your computer system could accommodate 6 million, there's something wrong with that contract. You know, if you could accommodate twice the previous record, that ought to be enough. 3 times the previous record. Well, if that's all you could do, you're not dealing with a third of what's coming in. And
Right.
so the employment commissions are way behind, but they're dealing with it, and a lot of people are getting unemployment compensation. There is one addition we made, a huge addition. A lot of people aren't eligible for unemployment compensation. Independent contractors, gig workers, barbers and things like that, never been eligible for unemployment compensation. We made them eligible. It's going to be a lot of paperwork, and it's going to be hard to get through the system. But when they finally get through, they will get significant unemployment compensation, so to help them get through the pandemic. That is a big deal, and hopefully we can remind ourselves of what we did during this pandemic, so the next time something comes up, we might notice that, well, maybe independent contractors do need unemployment compensation. Maybe barbers, when things go bad, maybe they do need unemployment compensation. So there are a lot of things we're learning in this situation that we may want to remind ourselves and do again in the future. But the replacement of income has been a huge factor in dealing with the disproportionate economic impact that African Americans and minorities have been suffering through this pandemic.
Yeah, you started to talk a little bit about what you all have been doing for students, and I know, you know, a lot of schools are closed right now and are probably closed through the rest of the school year. Can you talk a little bit about your priorities moving forward for young people?
Well, just like there are economic disparities and healthcare disparities that are exacerbated when you have something like this, education disparities are there already, and they've been exacerbated. I have a friend who has a son in high school in a wealthy part of right outside of Atlanta. He said the school's closed on Friday. His son was online getting instruction on Monday. His brother lives in Warrenton, Virginia, and his nephew hadn't gotten any instruction yet. Those disparities were there to begin with, and they're getting worse because of this pandemic. Some schools aren't set up, don't have the technological capacity to do online learning. Others, you know, it's no problem. Some teachers are able to do it. Some need training. So one of the things that we're going forward, one of the things we did, part of the $31 billion was money to on K through 12 to deal with whatever your problem happens to be. It wasn't nearly enough money. And so going forward, we're gonna have to put more money in there for technology, rebuilding schools with the broadband, training teachers to make sure they can do the technology. We may have to buy laptops for young people that don't have laptops. A lot of them do, some don't. And if you don't have a laptop, usually you say, well, don't worry about it, just go to the library. The library is closed.
Right.
You gotta have your own laptop. And so my friend in Atlanta, everybody got a notice that if you don't have a laptop, just call us, we'll get you one. They didn't have that same kind of thing in Warrenton, Virginia. We need to make sure that everybody has the technology, all the students are prepared so that they can learn. Special education is a particular problem. We know that special ed students are hardly getting the education they deserve now. We were fortunate, there was a discussion about a waiver. It said, since the schools aren't there, why don't we just waive the requirements under Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and we'll deal with it when they come back. We were able to defeat that idea, and they still have a responsibility to teach special ed students, even though they're not there. Now, hard as you try, it's not gonna be, they're not gonna do as good a job as they should. But they at least need to try, and so that these students don't regress so far. We need extra money for summer programs. If we ever get the, you know, they're talking about opening the schools, some are closed through the school year. Let's have some enrichment programs during the summer. When we regroup, we're gonna need more counselors. So this is, for a lot of students, this is a very traumatic situation. Readjustment is important. We need more counselors in the schools. We need to make sure that nutrition is there. There's a lot that we need to be doing in education. It has to be flexible because some schools have some needs and some have others. But dealing with the educational disparities that we know were there to begin with and have been exacerbated because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we need to make sure that we address those the best we can. And that's going to take money. And that's why we've had the initial funding and why we need so much more in the next round.
Yeah, that was a long list. So thank you for sharing all of that. I think we're also thinking a lot about workers. And one of the things that I've been most frustrated by is that my family members who do jobs that are kind of thankless are still required to go to work right now, right? Like they're essential workers right now that keep kind of our country running. Can you talk a little bit about your priorities for protecting those workers?
One of the problems that we've had, we have not had success on, and that is developing an enforceable OSHA regulation to protect workers in all industries from airborne infectious diseases. There has been pending at OSHA a regulation pending to do just that. There is guidance from the Center for Disease Control that gives guidance, but guidance is not enforceable. We need enforceable guidance, enforceable regulation, so that OSHA can go into a work site and make sure that the workers are protected. This isn't just in the healthcare setting. They did a little bit in the healthcare setting, not quite enough, but they did make a minor step about a week ago. But they need, grocery stores, prisons, senior citizen homes. What's going on in senior citizen homes? What can be done in senior citizen homes to prevent the tragedies that are occurring there? Postal workers. I checked into a hotel last night, and when you checked in, there was a plastic shield between me and the people checking me in. They were wearing masks. That kind of stuff does not cost that much. You can require customers coming into a grocery store to wear masks. You can have a shield between the cashier and the customers. A lot of little things you can do, but OSHA has to have an enforceable regulation, and politicians shouldn't be making this stuff up. Experts ought to go in and figure out what can be effective in protecting the workers. But there's so many workers in so many different settings that have to go to work, can't have the luxury of sitting at home being safe, have to go to work, and they need to be protected. Now, there is a discussion about what they're calling hazard pay or heroes pay, where we pay people who are exposed to these hazards, pay them more. That's fine, but that should not be in lieu of making the workplace safer. If we know the workplace isn't safe, the solution isn't, oh, I'll pay you more, going in there in an unsafe workplace. You ought to make the workplace safer, and then discuss whether or not you're gonna pay more. The first order of business is make the workplace safer, and there are a lot of things everybody knows that you can do to make the workplace safer for those workers who are essential, who have to go to work, and who are making life better. I'm sitting at home and getting stuff delivered to my house through the online purchases. I don't have to go out. I'm safe, but they're exposed. What can be done to make life better and safer for them? There's a lot that can be done, and we need to do it in the first order of business as an enforceable OSHA regulation. We've been talking about it. It's been pending in OSHA for 10 years. It's ready to go. All they have to do is do it.
Okay. I'm gonna shift a little bit, and I'm gonna combine my last two questions for you. The first is about how this economic crisis is affecting Black communities and what priorities might be for Black workers and businesses who are experiencing layoffs or aren't able to thrive right now. And then my second question is, how is the bill that you all are voting on this week, how does that fit into the larger need for stimulus packages?
Well, the bill we're doing, I think, addresses the question you just asked. African-American minority businesses in the first round did not get their fair share of contracts. You had the big businesses going in, scooping up all the money that was designed for small businesses. You had some scooping up tens of millions of dollars, even though they didn't need it. They just got the money. Those who were not sophisticated or did not have nice relationships with bankers or wanted smaller amounts where the cost of fooling with it, you make a lot more on a bigger loan than a smaller loan. So it's better for the bankers if they've got a backlog of work to do, work on the big loans where you make bigger fees. The smaller guys, the barbers and the beauticians, the flower shop, the cleaners, the small businesses were left out. So we came up with, and the money ran out. Okay, we have another package. This time we set aside a significant portion of the money for really small businesses. And we gave a significant portion of that money to local community banks and what they call CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions in the community, who are much more likely to be responsive to the minority community. So the minority businesses will have a better shot at the next round of financing. Hopefully, this will work out a lot better than the first round, so that their employees will be protected, because you get the benefits of the loans, or that they can be discharged if you spend a substantial portion of that on payroll, keeping your payroll and not firing people. You can a lot of the loans can be forgiven, so that the workers are protected, the businesses can flourish, and those minority banks that did not benefit from the first round can benefit. There's a couple of other things that we need in the future rounds. One is we unfortunately still have health insurance tied to your job. To your job, most people get their health insurance through their job. You lose your job, you lose your insurance. There is a provision, though, you can keep your insurance. All you have to do is pay the premium. Well, family premiums can be $1,000 a month. You just lost your job. You don't have $1,000 a month, so you lost your insurance. You can go into the Obamacare marketplace and get some insurance, but you may have to find new providers. You may have to start your deductible all over. And a couple of months later, you get your job back. You got to serve those providers back. You try to get your other providers back. You might have to start your deductible all over again. That's just a mess. If we can get people to keep their insurance, and paying the subsidizing the COBRA payment would go a long way in doing that. We need the OSHA regulation with a provision that there's no retaliation if you make an OSHA complaint. If you call OSHA and complain, I'm in an unsafe workplace, you ought not be able to be fired for that. It's kind of whistleblower protection on that. We need more money for education, and we need a lot more money for state and local governments. Today, Virginia is in the process of cutting education funding because of the projected shortfalls. First thing on the chopping block was a little 2% teacher salary increase that passed several weeks ago. Now they can't afford it, and that's to go. If we don't backfill some of the revenue losses, state and local, we will never be able to appropriate enough money for education just to make up for the shortfall. We need to make sure that the education funding is protected by making sure that the state and locals are funded. We have a lot of things that we can do on the federal level. When there's a recession, we spend more money in Medicaid, we spend more money in food stamps. You can do that on the federal level because you can run a deficit. States have to balance their budgets. So when there's a recession and the revenues go down, they got the two ways they can save money. They can fire people, or they can cancel contracts, and the contractors can fire people. Well, that's counterproductive if there's a recession going on already. So to the extent that we can backfill some of the revenue losses, that will go a long way in helping us protect jobs, protect services, and as chair of the Education and Labor Committee, protect education.
Thank you so much for your remarks. I think our respondents have a lot to kind of respond to right now. After hearing from the respondents, we're going to move on to the discussion part of the agenda. We're going to hear from the respondents and then Chairman Scott again. If you have a comment or a question, just remember you can type it in the chat box, or type in the chat box that you have a comment. And just a reminder, we're going to save this chat, so we'll be able to forward on your comments to the chairman's staff as well. So first we have Dr. John King. He is the president and CEO of the Education Trust and the former United States Secretary of Education. Dr. King, can you share your thoughts on the chairman's remarks and the current situation?
Sure, thank you. Thank you to the Joint Center for having me, and I'm always inspired by Chairman Scott's leadership and vision and commitment to equity. Um, you know, Chairman Scott's exactly right. The inequities that we're seeing in this COVID-19 crisis are a continuation, extension, exacerbation of disparities that existed before the COVID-19 crisis. We already, as a country, were too often given the least to the students who need the most. Low-income students and students of color get less access to quality early childhood education, less access to well-prepared teachers, less access to resources in their schools, less access to advanced coursework, less access to school counselors. And so we entered this crisis with those disparities as a backdrop, and now they've been exacerbated. In the context of distance learning, and remember, schools went to distance learning overnight for good public health reasons, but it's created a lot of challenges. Chairman Scott described the challenge around devices. And one of the things that we're seeing is even if a family has a device in the household, if they have 3 kids who all need to be working on their studies, that's not enough. It's really a question of a device for every child to participate in learning. The issue of bandwidth has always been a significant issue, particularly in our high needs rural communities. But it's also a real challenge in high needs urban communities. And one of the things that we're seeing is even if there is bandwidth so that you could get on the internet, many of the internet service providers are saying if you have an unpaid balance, you can't get on the internet. And the result is kids have no way to access school. Now, some districts are being creative. South Bend, Indiana is putting Wi-Fi hotspots on buses and parking buses in neighborhoods where they know there's kids who don't have Wi-Fi access. So there are creative solutions. And certainly the CARES Act, the stimulus funding that Chairman Scott described, could be used to try to close these gaps. But we need the FCC to do a lot more. And we need more resources towards providing bandwidth. We're seeing a challenge around teachers' readiness to shift to online learning. It's not so simple as just do the same things via Zoom that you would have done in your classroom. Students need much more support around working independently. Teachers need to adapt their instructional practices. And just as Chairman Scott described, some districts were already doing that kind of work before COVID-19 and were much more prepared for the shift to distance learning. We're seeing a challenge around the level of parental support that kids can get. In the African American workforce, only about 20% of the African American workforce can work from home. And so you have lots of kids who are left to their own devices and managing the work that's being assigned by school. They're not getting the same support. Or we think about English learners whose parents don't speak English at home, and they're not able to help their kids navigate. And what we'll see next fall is kids sitting next to each other who've had vastly different experiences. One kid who's had 2 parents at home supporting them, coaching them, helping them through their work, and another kid who hasn't really been able to get serious learning since February. We also are seeing socio-emotional gaps. Low-income students, students of color, already faced higher rates of trauma. And that's all been exacerbated by the disparities in health impact and economic impact of COVID-19. There are kids who are in homes where there's domestic violence, where there's abuse, where there's addiction. There are kids for whom the one place where they felt safe and nurtured and supported was school, and now they don't have that. So the need for mental health services, counseling, socio-emotional support is tremendous. The CARES Act helps. There's no question that $30.75 billion for education is a good thing. And I know Chairman Scott fought to get that number that high. The early conversations had the number down at something like $2 billion. And so moving it up to $30.75 billion was a huge victory, and it is not nearly enough. When you compare it to the 2009 stimulus, the education portion there was about 110 billion out of 750, 775 billion. This is 30.75 billion out of 2.2 trillion. Just not nearly enough. And Chairman Scott described some of the things that are desperately needed. Funding for states so that we don't see draconian cuts to education. National Governors Association has asked for $500 billion for state stabilization. That seems to me to be a floor, not a ceiling for the conversation about what's needed for state budgets. There's going to be a huge challenge of learning loss. We know kids lose ground in the summer, but they'll have lost even more ground as a result of time away from school. So we're going to need additional funding for summer 20 and summer 21, expanded learning time, after school, intensive tutoring, efforts to really make up for the ground that students have lost. We're going to need those additional counselors and mental health services that Chairman Scott described. We're going to need dropout prevention programming. I'm really worried about kids who already had a fragile relationship to school, maybe not coming back in September, or coming back in September and being frustrated with return to routine and walking out of high school. And we know there's just not real opportunity in the 21st century economy without even a high school diploma. So targeted funding for the highest need students will be critical. So the last point I'd make is, and I'm sure Becky will touch on this, there are heroic teachers doing heroic work all over the country, making sure that they stay connected to kids, making sure that kids feel seen. The Phoenix Union High School District in Arizona has a Every Student Every Day campaign to make sure every kid is contacted by a member of the district staff every day to check on them, to check if they need something, if they need food, if they need Wi-Fi access, if they need support. There are teachers who are checking in with families, but parents are really worried. We did a poll recently of parents in New York and California. More than almost 90% of the parents expressed real concern that their kids were going to lose academic ground as a result of this crisis. And we can't afford that. Education is the key to the future of our economy. It's the key to the future of our democracy. So I'm grateful that we have Chairman Scott fighting the good fight on Capitol Hill. But I think we all have a responsibility to organize at the local level, in states, and in Washington to help give him cover and support in fighting for our kids.
Thank you so much, Dr. King. Keeping in that vein, we're going to move to Becky Pringle. She is the Vice President of the National Education Association. And I want to say my mom is a teacher, and she was very excited that you would be on this call today. So,
where does she teach?
She's in East St. Louis in School District 189 in Illinois.
Wonderful, wonderful. Good morning, Jessica. It's so good to see you. Hi, Spencer. How you doing? And John, and oh my goodness, Chairman Scott, thank you. And I really want to go back to thanking you for being such a visionary leader at a time when we needed you to help push the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. You and your office work so very closely with the 3 million members of the National Education Association. And here we are in this moment when you stood up and said that in the reauthorization, we absolutely had to address equity and access and opportunity. Here we are. And I appreciate that you were ahead of that curve. And so we started that work because everyone on this call knows that this is not new. These are issues we've been fighting for years. I want to thank the Joint Center. What is this, Spencer, your 5th decade where you've been focused in on the impact of policies and economics on the Black community. And we know that over those 5 decades, we have been fighting the inequities that exist in that system. In education, we also know that we have this confluence of factors. We have structural inequities that are built into our system that impacts whether or not our students can learn. So it's not only about all that John just talked about and Chairman Scott just talked about, but it is about the inequities in a healthcare system that makes it impossible for some of our students to come to school with glasses or having the dental work they need. We know that there are housing inequities that impact whether they have housing security. We know that there are inequities in the economy that for far too long has resulted in generational poverty specifically with our Black community. So, no one should be surprised that the African American community is more disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. When we have crises like this, it's when those structural flaws show up, and they show up in a big way. So we're not surprised. This bright light is shining for some people on what has existed for our students and our families and our communities for far too long. And so I want to thank the chairman for thinking about what we need to continue to fight for. We've made some progress. He laid all of that out in the first 3 stimulus packages, but we all know it's not enough. It's not enough. And even though we had some funding for K-12 and higher education, it's not enough. It's not enough to ensure that all of our students who need forgiveness on those loans get that forgiveness. It's not enough to make sure that our students have the resources that they need so they can be successful. We know it's not enough because there was not a dedicated, as we were fighting for a dedicated stream of money in that last stimulus package to ensure that the FCC, John, deals with that E-rate program. We know that's a successful program, and we know we have to increase the funding there to increase the access to the tools, to the technology, to the broadband that we know far too many of our students don't have access to. So those are the kinds of things that we know, Chairman Scott, you're going to continue to fight for as this next package goes through. We absolutely need those things. But here's the thing. The most significant word in our Constitution is we. We the people. We the people. Regardless of race or income, regardless of gender or sexual orientation, it is we the people. We have never as a country lived up to that we. And so even as we are working to fight these inequities right now, our babies need us right now to make sure they have a Chromebook and they have those buses driving around to give them hotspots. We need to do that right now. But in this moment, we have to lift up our heads and we have to think about how we're transforming these systems where inequities have been built into them based on race and income level and ability. Chairman Scott, you could not be more right. And I thank you for fighting and making sure that we did not have those waivers for our students with special needs. We have to continue to serve them. We have to find a way. But we have forever, the federal government forever has promised full funding for IDEA, and we've never had that 40% ever from the federal government. So those are long-term solutions that we have to continue to fight for. And I can tell you our members are going to continue to do that. We know that if our students come to school hungry, they cannot learn. And I could not be more proud of the men and women quite honestly, who have put their lives on the line. Without protection, they're driving around and delivering meals and learning packets. They are continuing to live up to the powerful, powerful preamble to the NEA mission that we, the members of the National Education Association of the United States of America, are the voice of education professionals. Our work is fundamental to this nation, and we accept the profound trust that has been placed in us. Jessica, I have to tell you every day, my heart soars and it sinks. It soars when I see our educators, our bus drivers stepping up and trying to make sure our students are safe and they are fed and they are learning. It sinks when I open my email and I find out about another member who has lost their life. to this disease. Our babies are depending on us to be worthy of them. Not only in this moment, but they are depending on us to fundamentally transform a system that has disadvantaged some forever and advantaged others. It is not okay, and I can tell you that the 3 million members of the National Education Association will continue to fight and fight and fight for what our students need and deserve. Thank you so very much, Chairman Scott, for all you have done, and I know all you will continue to do to fight for our students.
Thank you so much, Becky, for those comments. And I think we have a couple questions in already that have been sent to me, but if people have more questions, feel free to go ahead and type them in the chat box. And we are going to hear from our final 2 respondents. So up next, we have the National Urban League Vice President for Policy and Advocacy and the Executive Director of the Washington Bureau, Clint Odom.
Great, thank you, Spencer. Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being here today. I'm gonna focus my comments on workforce issues. They've been covered today quite well, but I want to draw your attention to a few things. I'll begin by saying the National Urban League is the nation's oldest civil rights and direct services organization. We have about 90 affiliates throughout the United States, 36 states in particular, and we provide direct services to about 1.5 million, mostly African American and other people of color. The pandemic has brought upon African Americans 2 body blows. The first is that we have both higher exposure to COVID-19 and we have the highest economic disruption of any other group that has been followed. With respect to geography, according to McKinsey, Blacks are 1.5 to 2 times more likely to live in counties that have the highest risk of severe public health and economic disruption from the pandemic. Putting that in real terms, that's about 30% of the US population and 43% of the Black population. Some 17.6 million African Americans are on the front lines of this disease. With respect to jobs, Black Americans are overrepresented in 9 of the 10 lowest wage jobs considered to be high contact, essential services. And as has been said before, only 1 in 5 African Americans and only 1 in 6 Latinx people have the luxury of being able to work from home. This is a problem. And one problem that I would be remiss if I did not include is to talk about Black businesses. The hardest hit sectors of the pandemic have hit about 40% of the revenues for Black-owned businesses, compared to 25% of the revenues for all firms. This is a devastating impact and shows the concentration of Black people and Black businesses right in the sights of COVID pandemic. So that brings us to the question of what we are seeing on the ground in our affiliates throughout the United States. The chairman has alluded to the unprecedented stress that's been placed on the unemployment insurance infrastructure of the states. Our anecdotal accounts confirm that. We've seen problems of states processing UI claims because the departments of labor were not solvent even before COVID struck. And this has led to significant understaffing and systems crashing. Small business lending, as the chairman indicated, African-American small businesses were not robustly represented in the first round. I think that's a fair statement. We're hopeful that the interim legislation that passed out of the Senate yesterday and that the chairman and his colleagues will be voting on tomorrow will help mend that gap. As we know, some institutions got money that probably were not in need of it. I'm going to continue to grow my beard until Spencer's alma mater refunds the money they received and give it to the Joint Center. So we'll see how that goes. With respect to regulatory barriers, we've even seen instances where federal adult education classes or job training programs that require diagnostic testing, the regulations require that those tests be provided in person. We are trying to find workarounds to deal with that, but at the moment, we don't have a permanent solution and would welcome any help we could get on that score. So how's the Urban League responded? We fought to include not-for-profits and small businesses and Black churches in the payroll protection program. And we were very pleased to see their eligibility be advanced. We'd like to see in the second round greater participation. With respect to job training, the National Urban League is one of the largest training sites for seniors. Seniors have borne a disproportionate brunt of the COVID pandemic. Their numbers are higher represented in the mortality count, and they are also, because of the prior Great Recession, have been forced to go back into the workforce because retirement money isn't there. And traditional other areas of support just aren't there. So we have been pushing hard for the so-called CSEP program to be fully funded. We enjoyed some funding in the CARES Act. We will continue to push for that and hope that we don't forget our seniors as we struggle with this pandemic. Our Urban League affiliates in Louisiana and Louisville have continued to do job fairs virtually. And all of our workforces and programs have moved to virtual offerings. We're using this platform, Zoom, Facebook, and other apps to stay in touch, to get the messages out and services delivered to the best we can. So what do we need? The chairman alluded to it, my colleagues alluded to it, we need more funding. We need more funding to fight to make sure relief dollars are actually flowing to small businesses that need it, and minority firms are participating in the administration of those funds. We need CSEP funding, and we're cautiously optimistic that all of these things will come. I'm going to focus on two things that really have relevance in light of the fact that a number of states are planning to lift their restrictions on stay-at-home orders. This is going to put Black folks front and center. Testing, testing, testing. It is not enough that $25 billion was included in this Senate bill unless we are prioritizing the testing of our frontline workers, our essential workers. This pandemic will continue to ravage our communities. The evidence in the states is showing that we are looking at a slaughter. The states that are proposing to lift their stay-at-home orders are at the bottom of the rates of testing. They are the highest in the rates of disproportionate fatalities from COVID. That's a deadly mix. We've got to make sure that our states are prioritizing the testing and prioritizing the PPE. If we, as the chairman alluded, the OSHA regulations are in flux. They're not clear. To my mind and to the minds of others, our businesses should be providing PPE. In our own lives, we see there's far too little PPE going around for the people who are touching our stuff, who are serving us, and taking care of our loved ones. These folks need PPE, and we can't simply say, oh, the businesses, the employers are supposed to do it. We need help in this score. So thank you for the opportunity, and I can't agree more with any of the points that have been made by my predecessors. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Clint. Tanya Wallace-Gobern is the executive director of the National Black Workers Center project, and I feel like Clint gave a good transition, so I felt like it was like time for you.
Thank you, Jessica, Spencer, Representative Scott, for convening this most important discussion and lifting up the need for racial equity during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. You know, it's unfortunate but true that ethnic and racial origin has perhaps the greatest impact on jobs, compensation, and a worker's option for redress when mistreated by an employer. Black workers in particular face a racialized political economy in which they are exploited because of their race and their class. In this moment, when there is such a huge focus on essential workers and appreciation for their labor, I think this is our opportunity to change the narrative about what real appreciation is and the value that we place on workers and their labor. I also find it ironic that the very same people who we have battled tooth and nail for to pay $15 an hour are the exact same people that we depend on for our most indispensable needs. Jessica, you were correct when you said that this work was considered less than or thankless work. The reality is that the most underpaid and undervalued in our society are the most critical to our daily survival. And it's not because of COVID-19. They have always served this role. However, our society took their work for granted because of who these workers are. They're women and people of color, and we deem them as less deserving. 1 out of every 3 women are essential workers, and Black people are overwhelmingly working frontline employees. They're bus drivers, hotel workers, food servers, city service employees. Black people are disproportionately also public sector employees. Support for policies that provide 100% wage replacement and paid sick leave are crucial. And any policy that fully supports them and provides the necessary protective gear are crucial as well. Black people are amongst those in warehouses and other industries protesting unsafe working conditions. They must be provided the full protection of the law that any worker receives for engaging in concerted action. You know, let's face it, it's because of their protest and whistleblowing that protective gear has been provided to many. Representative Scott, I'm so glad to hear you lift up OSHA. If there was ever a need for OSHA, surely that need is right now. Currently, we know OSHA is underfunded and does not have the number of inspectors needed to do its job properly. Also, I would add the window of time to issue citations for health and safety violations needs to be increased. Black people are disproportionately unhoused, and so any policy that gets them off the streets and into unused hotel rooms, for example, not mass shelters, which become virus incubators, are important. Parents are having to make the difficult choice between missing work because their kids are out of school or leaving their kids at home alone, and that's not a fair choice to ask anyone to make. Black people are also disproportionately incarcerated, as we know, which is another incubator for the virus. So increasing policies that reduce the prison population are important, but even more so when these populations are released from prison, we need to make sure that they have a place to go. If you haven't been working, how will you be able to afford rent, for example? We also cannot forget to give attention to gig economy workers and home health care workers. They need our support. I want to also speak to eviction moratoriums, which are a good first step, but the issue of not being able to pay rent or mortgages is a ticking time bomb. After COVID is over, the need to catch up on rent help will be needed for that. Financial support will be needed, or we should expect to see increased homelessness. And as a result of Blacks dying at a higher rate than other populations, burial funds, bereavement, and mental health provisions are needed. I also think that we need to shout out the state of Michigan, and in particular, the city of Detroit, for offering testing to all essential workers. Testing is good for business, and it's definitely good for workers. And then lastly, before we get into our discussion, I want to just say that bold leadership is required. We must take advantage of this moment to gain wins that we would not have even dreamed of pre-COVID. We have to end this talk of returning to now normal with a sort of nostalgia. The racism, discrimination, disregard for worker safety, worker voice, and fair compensation should have never been part of what was seen as normal or business as usual in our country. And post-COVID, we have the opportunity to create a safety net and social welfare system that truly works in the ways that we all want and need. And the National Black Workers Center is pleased and honored to join you all in this fight.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I think we're moving to Spencer. He's going to manage our Q&A here.
All right, so I think that we've got Lisa Kylar Barrett with a question, and then Congressman Scott, I've got a question in the text that I'll read for you, and then we'll turn it over to you to wrap us up. So Lisa?
Thanks so much, Spencer, and thank you to the Joint Center, and particularly to you, Spencer and Jessica, again, for hosting this important conversation. Chairman Scott, I just wanted to raise really two issues. One is the issue that we're seeing with regard to funding for the U.S. Postal Service. And I'm raising it in this context because as we look at the data, I think the last numbers that are available are actually 2013, but 40% or a little over 40% of the workforce for the U.S. Postal Service is minority. A little close to 45% are women. Close to 22% are Black. And what we've heard or are hearing from the Postal Service is that if they don't have an investment by September, that they are looking at dire consequences and possible failure. And so I just wanted to flag that as it is something that we feel is not getting enough attention in this COVID discussion. We think it has multiple impacts aside from the impact on the labor and employment aspects, but also on voting by mail and census and a number of other things that will really impact people's lives and the funding that's available to them for a number of programs. And so I wanted to flag that. And then the other piece that I just wanted to flag, because it was raised by a colleague to us this morning, is concern about businesses of color and the access to the small business loans, and whether there's an opportunity to specifically designate or have the SBA specifically designate a portion of those funds for minority institutions to ensure that those institutions get their fair share of that money. So those are the two issues that I wanted to flag.
Thanks, Lisa. And of course, Lisa is from the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. Also, Congressman Scott, we've got a question in the text about targeted funding for enhanced summer employment. Is that possible in the next COVID stimulus? So we'll basically turn it over to you. And then after you kind of wrap it up in terms of responding to the respondents, I'll just close this out. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Spencer. Thank you for putting this together. You've been leading the Joint Center, just done a yeoman's job. You really rescued the organization. I've known about the Joint Center for at least 45 years. I followed it when I was in law school, and it's a great organization, and you're keeping the tradition going. So thank you for your leadership. This is a very important institution in our community. Becky and John talked about the work we did in ESSA. She was with the NEA and working with the NEA, and John was leading the Department of Education. And equity was one of the most important issues we dealt with during that time. And we're seeing how important that work was. Clint and Ms. Wallace-Gobern were talked about workforce, need to train the right people, need to make sure that people are protected, trained, and addressing the high-risk workers. You brought together a real great panel, and I want to express my appreciation to you and for them for their comments. The Postal Service as an issue has, we haven't had a Democratic caucus phone call where the Postal Service was not brought up. I can't remember. It's always brought up. I don't have to go through the reasons that were articulated, but it's just been a problem. We've been trying to get it in every package, and it's just been difficult. We'll continue advocating for the Postal Service. You mentioned vote by mail. It's going to be important that we have a strong postal service so that we can have a decent election. He also mentioned access to loans. There will be in this package that we're voting on a significant focus on minority businesses having access to loans. That was one of the real disappointments in the last go round, where people that did not have an ongoing relationship with a bank were essentially left out. We think we've designed it this time so that that should not happen, but we'll just have to, we'll be following that. In terms of summer jobs, let me just tell you, summer jobs are going to be important not only for the people working the summer jobs, but for the kinds of summer jobs that they can do. When I was in college, my summer job was a counselor with Upward Bound. So I got a summer job, and the Upward Bound program got a counselor. I think we should have a lot of those jobs where the college students particularly, but everybody else gets a job. But we need to focus on the kinds of jobs that can help young people. As it's been pointed out, the summer slide is bad enough, but you add a couple of months longer, it just makes life worse. We need to make sure that we're doing something during the summer to make sure that the children don't get further behind than they are. The equity situation, some students aren't falling behind because they have the technology and the support. Those on the short side of the equity balance are the ones that need particular focus. Special ed students particularly, but students that are on the lower economic, socioeconomic part of it, and at the bottom of the equity when it comes to education, need significant help. So Spencer, I've enjoyed participating, and I look forward to the next one. But again, I want to thank you for your hard work in leading the Joint Center.
Well, thank you, Chairman Scott. You know, I still remember that time at GW Law School where you had a detailed policy discussion with a group of the top law professors around the country, and you were so engaged in the details. You're among just the most thoughtful members of Congress. We appreciate your leadership. And I only have to say among the most thoughtful because we have to have some other speakers on here. But you know, I just think the world of you. We appreciate your leadership, and please let us know what we can do to be supportive of you and your outstanding work on behalf of Black workers and students and all Americans. You also need to thank, of course, outstanding leadership of Joint Center Chair Barbara Johnson, her leadership, another graduate of Hampton University, and Vice President Jessica Fulton for organizing this, and our team members, Victoria Johnson and Aaliyah Jones, for their support. Our great partners, Secretary King, Becky, Clint, Tanya. You know, you all are key partners. You represent important perspectives for Black workers and students around the nation. Finally, thanks to all of you for joining us. I want to ask that you go to jointcenter.org. At the Joint Center, you know, we didn't foresee COVID-19 and its major impact on Black communities. We didn't plan for it. We didn't budget for it. But in collaboration with partners like the National Urban League and the National Black Worker Center Project, you know, we're doing the work the best that we can because we believe that federal COVID-19 policy debates are moving fast and Black communities need to be at the table, and Black communities from around the country here need to be at the table. So please go to jointcenter.org, watch our video discussions, sign up for our weekly newsletter on COVID-19 and Black communities, and give us some feedback, right, on how we can better serve you in terms of ensuring that Black communities are a part of the federal COVID-19 policy discussion. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.